Today I'm going to be making a pair of tongs out of a piece of half-inch square bar. Hi, I'm Dennis Frechette and welcome back. Today I'm going to be using a piece of half-inch square bar to make some tong blanks for a pair of tongs. Uh, Process is exactly the same as what I used earlier for my 5/8 tong blanks, but obviously a little bit less material, so these are well suited for very light-duty tongs. And I'll have the offset chart for you at the end of the video, so hope this helps you out. So here I have a piece of half-inch square bar. It's just hot rolled mild steel. There's nothing special about it. If this is your first pair of tongs and you need to be able to hold on to the bar while you're forging, make sure that this bar is long enough that you can work at one end while you're holding the other. Here I'm laying out the reference marks that I'm going to need for the handles, and you'll find this information in the offset charts at the end of the video. I'm going to start this heat by reinforcing the offset that goes from the hinge area to the handles, because that was just outside of the heat. And now I'm marking the offset for the transition between the hinge area to the jaws. So in this orientation, the jaws are closest to me, then the hinge area, and then the handles are at the end of the bar. I'm going to start by forging down the hinge area, and then I'm going to work my way down the handles. Unfortunately, I had a slight lapse in concentration here, and I rotated the bar clockwise instead of counterclockwise. So here you can see how the overlap for the jaws is on the wrong side. The bulge that's created from the offset for the hinge area to the jaws is facing me. It should be facing away from me. And if you're wondering why I'm happily working away here, it's because I did not notice it until much, much later in the process. Fortunately, it was a pretty easy fix and there was no harm done, but this is one of the things that you run into when you're working in an odd sequence than you're used to. The normal progression when you're working on a bar that's the right length is to start working on the jaws and then the hinge area, and then last thing that you do is to forge out the reins. But when you're working on a long bar like this, it's easier to start forging out the reins and then working back to everything else. I could have saved myself a lot of trouble by just taking the time to mark out the length of the jaws that I wanted to use. If I had taken an angle grinder and cut a shallow groove at that line, I could have started forging the jaws just enough to define what that section of bar is, and then at that point everything else would have fallen into place. Here I'm roughing in the dimensions for the main block that I'm using for the upper part of the reins. I'm just forging a short section. I don't want to get anywhere near the offset that I have for the very ends of the reins. I just want a basic dimension that I can aim for. Now I can jump to the end of the bar, forge out that dimension, and basically just work my way back and join the two blocks together. This section of bar is going to be quite thin, so I can really move a lot of metal here without worrying about overshooting my mark. I'm being careful not to lose the offset that defines the end of this bar. To get everything to work out the way that I planned, I have to make sure that this section of bar gets forged with that amount of material. If I let it creep up the bar, I'm going to be using material that belongs somewhere else, and I won't be able to get the taper that I'm looking for. So believe it or not, this lumpy bar is actually going to give me pretty clear directions on how to forge this taper. I have the larger bar section pretty clearly defined at the top near the hinge area, and the very end of the bar where the smaller bar section is going to go, That's pretty close to the final size as well. So I can start forging out a lot of that mass in the middle because I can see how everything is going to fit together. I know that I'm getting pretty close to the final dimensions here, so I'm rounding off the corners of the bar and creating more of a finished look so I have a visual reminder of where I left off. At this point I have the end of the bar that's basically the way I want it, and I have the other end of the handles right up near the hinge area that's pretty much the right size. So at this point I can just visualize a line between those 2 points and hammer out anything that sits outside of those lines. And now it's just a matter of repeating that process up the bar and then refining that taper as I go. So the first tong blank is done, and I'm getting ready to start on the second one here. And if you're keeping track, I still have no idea that there's a problem with the first one that I forged. Now that I have one half of the pair of tongs done, I can be a little more confident about how I'm forging this one because I have something that I can measure with. So I'm starting at the end of the bar. I'm going to forge the end of the bar pretty much right down to its final dimensions, compare it with the original, and then I'm going to work my way back up to the hinge area and the jaws, comparing it the whole time with the half that I already have forged out. Here I've measured the length that I need for the jaws, and I've decided to cut it from the bar so that I can work from the jaws back the way I normally would. By cutting the blank from the bar, I now have all the visual cues that I normally use in the correct orientation, so this blank is being forged out correctly. So now I'm finally comparing the two, and you can see the big problem with working alone is that you have no one to blame this on. So anyway, it was a pretty simple fix. It's just a matter of pushing the bar back over onto the other side, so no big deal. I'm still trying to figure out what I did wrong, but anyway, I'm feeling much better now. Here I'm back working on the original Tong blank that I forged out, and you can see how I'm just using half-face blows to shove the mass of the jaw over on the other side where it belongs. There's a little bit of scarring on the surface, but that's going to disappear when I'm done forging the jaws. And I'm taking the time to do this now just because it'll make it a lot easier to compare the two blanks now that I'm working in that area. At this point, I'm just working out slight differences in the two handles. So I want to be really careful how I do this. So I'm going to move away from the corner of the anvil, which moves a lot of material, right to the center of the anvil, and I'm going to tip my hammer slightly just to use the outside edge of the face of the hammer to put very, very shallow fullers in the surface of the bar, and that'll just nudge it along and give me the fine tuning that I need. I'm also going to be taking very low heat, so the effect of the hammering is going to be even less because I want to just make very, very small changes here. I'm going to be turning these into a pair of bowl tongs, so here I'm creating the offset right at the very end of the bar that I'm going to need for the jaws. Everything behind this point just gets hammered down to a thick, wide strap. Here I'm just checking the length of the forged jaw so I can hammer the other side to the same length. Here I'm using the cross peen to hammer the very end of the bar into a wide, flat shape that I can hammer into the V-shaped jaws that I need. Now that I have the overall shape of the jaws done, I'm ready to forge the actual V-shaped bit into the ends. Normally I would hammer the end of the bar into a swage, but if you don't have anything like that, just a bent piece of bar will be fine. As long as the edges are supported and you can drive a fuller down the center of the jaws, you'll get that rough V shape that you need. The final shaping really gets done around the bar anyway, so you just need something to start with. Here I'm getting ready to punch the hole for the rivet that's going to connect the two halves of the pair of tongs. I'm taking my time to make sure that the punch is directly in the center of the hinge area. I'm not driving it in, I'm just creating very light marks on the surface. So if it's not quite right, I can move it over, create a new mark. When I'm happy with it, I'm going to drive that mark in, and that's the mark that my punch is going to follow when I'm actually punching the hole. Now that I'm happy with the location, I'm going to drive the punch in as far as I can with this heat. It's going to feel like it's hitting the surface of the anvil, but it isn't really there yet. So I'm going to take another heat, drive the punch right down to the surface, and then I'll punch out that slug that's left at the bottom, and then I can drift my hole. Here I'm starting to work on the jaws for the second Tong blank, and like everything else, I'm going to be using the original Tong blank to compare to this one to check my progress. I've taken note of the final length of the forging, so I'll be working to that measurement while the bar is straight, and then once I start curving everything, it'll be easier to compare the two together, and I'll get them as close as I can. So here's the cross peening from a different angle. I'm using the flat of the hammer to widen it out a little bit so I have a little better target. And then I switch over to the cross peen and I work from the center out to the two sides. I don't need to forge this out very much because this pair of tongs is only meant to hold very small bars, so the two faces of the jaws are going to be very short. And even though these are a light duty pair of tongs, I do want the jaws to be as heavy as possible so they don't deform very easily. Now I have mentioned before that the standard length for a rivet head is basically 1.5 times the diameter of the rivet. So if you have two heads like you do on a pair of tongs, you add 3 times the diameter of the rivet and that gives you your length. Now as you can tell, this is way over. It's a bar that I had around for a different pair of tongs. These are a lot lighter, so it's way too long. But I'm going to try it anyway just to show you, hopefully, that it can be done. Hopefully it won't be this demonstration on why you shouldn't be doing this. But if you take a light hammer, take your time, go at it very carefully, then you can set this rivet even though it is way too long. Now, it should be obvious even at this point that this is going to make one massive rivet that's going to be way too big for the pair of tongs that I'm working with. But the point I'm trying to make is that even if you go a little bit over, you know, not as far as I've gone here, but you can still go ahead and forge it out and make a usable pair of tongs out of it. And as an added bonus, I just noticed that I forgot to forge the other jaw when it was a single piece, and it would have been easy to handle. But these things happen. It's not a big deal. It's just nice when they happen when no one's looking. Here I'm having trouble adjusting the jaws to the bar. I forged the jaws out a little too wide and the bottom edges are hitting before they're grabbing the bar. So I need to take an angle grinder, cut away the inside edges a little bit, and that'll reduce the thickness of the jaws and it'll allow me to forge it down so it can clamp onto the bar. I don't need to grind away a lot of material. In this case, there was just a couple of edges that were sticking out a little bit more and they were bumping into each other. So once I got rid of those and created a flatter area, then the jaws closed right up around the bar and I was able to get a tight fit. So here we are, even with a few bumps in the road, managed to get a good pair of tongs out of the deal.